this hard-fought campaign. But when you have today even the Leave campaign saying there's going to be an economic consequence, people need to know that before they cast their vote.
He claims he'd have no choice but to deliver such bad news, because he'd have to fill a £30 billion hole in the books. But the chances of George Osborne standing on the steps with a budget like that are slim. It's almost impossible to imagine that he'd get the support. But the message number 11 wants to give is that if the country votes to leave the EU, we'd all pay one way or another. The nearly 70 Tory MPs who want out of the EU have made plain they'll defy him. One MP told me, smart guy, stupid move. The campaign leaders haven't made their views public. Some ministers are privately incredulous. This is no longer just about the referendum, but George Osborne's authority too.
You have a chancellor coming out and irresponsibly trying to scare the public and even scare the markets. That is utterly wrong. I've never seen anything like it in 24 years, and he needs to think again and stop this nonsense at once.
You're saying if he carried on like this, he'd have to go?
This is irresponsible. What is responsible is for a chancellor to say, no matter what happens, Britain is good enough to forge its way.
But there could be huge turbulence if we vote to leave. Outers published 5 new laws they'd try to pass if they win. To end EU immigration, to abolish VAT on energy bills, and to negotiate new trade deals. Almost like an alternative mini-manifesto. This campaign's gone way beyond the ordinary, far past the usual insults and intrigue of politics. And now with a significant chunk of Tory MPs saying if the country votes out, they'd try to oust George Osborne, it feels like there's a coup in waiting. The police even got involved, as campaigns weren't just messing around on the river, but taking each other on. There's little sign of apathy as this decision approaches. Every awareness of how much it counts. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Westminster.
To talk about this emergency budget notion with our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed. How realistic would that be, Kamal?
Well, certainly today, Hugh, the Treasury or the Remain camp have tried to make it look realistic. This is the document the Remain camp brought out about this emergency budget. There is a real budget earlier this year from the Treasury. They look pretty similar. Now, most economists agree that if Britain left the European Union, at least in the short term, there would be an economic shock. And that economic shock could have an effect on the public finances and could leave a shortfall of about £30 billion by 2020. Now, would any chancellor in that scenario have to achieve all that savings needed to fill that shortfall in one budget, in one emergency budget here? That's pretty unlikely. George Osborne admitted that different chancellors would have different approaches to spending cuts, to tax rises, to whether they might borrow a little more or stretch out the timescale at which they said they were going to hit a budget surplus. So in terms of an emergency budget in one go, pretty unlikely. What's really interesting, though, is how much is this debate resonating around the world now? Well, tonight, Janet Yellen, who is the chairwoman of the Federal Reserve in America, that's the US central bank, has said that the vote on June the 23rd has consequences for the global economy. Consequences so uncertain that she has said she has put off increasing interest rates in America, at least in part because of the referendum in the UK. She's not saying if those consequences are good or bad, but the world is certainly watching for the outcome of the vote on June the 23rd.
Okay, come on, once again, thanks very much. Kamal Ahmed, there for us. Well, if Britain votes to stay in the European Union, there should still be reform of the rules on free movement of people, according to the Home Secretary, Theresa May, who's been explaining her attitude to the question of immigration. Our political editor, Laura Kunzberg, has spoken to prominent figures on both sides of the debate, and in this exclusive interview, she asked the Home Secretary why she's decided to back the Remain campaign.
In a world of loudmouths, she's a quiet politician. Don't mistake that for having nothing to say. For a while on the EU, though, it wasn't clear where Theresa May would pin her colours, which way she'd go.
Well, there were plenty of voices suggesting what I should do in this. Of course, there were quite a lot of voices suggesting that I should go down the Leave route. But as I say, I approach this decision in the way I approach other important decisions. Look at the facts and come to a view And when I put all that together, when I think about the potential risk to jobs, the uncertainties for our economy if we were to leave the European Union, when I think about the security, the discussions I've had within the EU, because I do believe we are more secure in the EU.
But this campaign's about immigration too. As Home Secretary, her responsibility.
I completely understand why people are concerned about immigration. There's no silver bullet, there's no one thing that you can do that is suddenly going to deal with all the problems and concerns people have with immigration. And that includes leaving the EU. That's not the single answer to this issue.
But there's one big truth, though, here, isn't there? Which is, for as long as we're in the EU, we can't cap the numbers of people coming in here from other countries in Europe.
There are some changes coming up in free movement rules. We should look at further reform in the future.
What would you say to your colleagues, though, who have been campaigning so viciously against each other?
It's understandable that people feel very passionately about it.
But when you said you wanted a serious and mature debate, it sounded a bit like you were telling them to grow up.
No, what I was doing was setting out my approach to this campaign.
A reluctant Remainer, has she hesitated to dig in?
You've been quite quiet during the campaign. Why have you come back?
Well, I haven't hung back. I don't think I've been quiet. I'll be out and about over the next few days. But of course, I've also had some government business to do. And I suppose it's how I've always gone with whatever